Welcome to Quick Speak, the English podcast. Today, we are going to look closely at something important that many people experience working in a company, or what we call corporate life.
That's right. It touches so many lives.
Our mission in this podcast is to help you understand what corporate life is really like, where it came from, and how it affects people.
And we'll use information from different places to explore this together.
Exactly. This is a conversation for you so you can learn about this topic and learn some English words too. Okay, let's start at the beginning. How did working in a big company become, so common?
That's a great place to start. To understand corporate work today, we really need to go back in time.
Before the big companies.
Yes. Before that, most people worked differently. Often at home, maybe making things by hand, or working on farms.
Right, smaller scale.
Definitely. But then, about 200 years ago, came the Industrial Revolution.
Ah, the time of factories. I remember learning about that.
Exactly. Factories needed lots of people, all working together in one place.
A big change from working alone.
A huge change. Everyone had to follow the same rules, the same schedule. And as these companies got bigger, they needed structure.
Structure. Like who does what?
Kind of. They became like a pyramid. You had many workers at the bottom, the fewer managers above them, and just a few leaders right at the top.
Okay.
Sometimes they draw this out, like a chart, an organization chart. It shows who reports to whom, who has more power.
So even way back then, it wasn't just about the work itself, but also where you fit in, your status.
Yes, your position in that structure, it really mattered. Moving up meant more influence, more status. But, even with this new efficiency, problems started cropping up pretty early.
Like what kind of problems?
Well, workers often faced really long hours, and they had less personal freedom, always having to follow managers' orders. This kind of early unhappiness, this discomfort with corporate life, people start talking about it.
So the seeds of corporate malaise were sown early on. It wasn't a perfect system from the start.
Not at all. Then, companies kept changing. Fast forward to the later part of the 1900s, say the 80s and 90s.
What happened then?
Well, globalization was a big factor. Companies became really focused on making money competing internationally.
More pressure.
A lot more pressure. They often tried to cut costs, maybe reduce staff. Work became much more demanding. And this new idea emerged, the corporate warrior.
Corporate warrior sounds intense.
It was. Or the workaholic hero. The idea was that working incredibly long hours, like 60, 70 hours a week, was actually a good thing. A badge of honor.
Wow, so working yourself to the bone became something to aspire to.
Pretty much, it showed you were dedicated, tough, committed to the company.
That sounds like it could have a really significant impact on people's well-being. What happens, inside, emotionally, mentally, when you're under that kind of pressure?
Well, that leads us directly to the idea of burnout.
Ah, burnout. I've definitely heard that term a lot. What exactly is it?
Simply put, burnout means feeling extremely tired. Not just physically tired, but emotionally and mentally drained because of chronic stress from your job.
Okay, drained. When did people start seriously talking about this?
Well, the term became clearer in the 1970s. A psychologist, Herbert Freudenberger, first described it. He noticed it particularly in people in caring professions like nurses or social workers, people under immense stress.
So it started with those specific jobs?
Initially, yes. But over time, we realized what burnout can affect anyone, any worker in any field, really, if they face high stress and feel like they have little control over their situation.
So it's much broader now.
Absolutely. Today, major health organizations like the World Health Organization actually recognize burnout as an occupational phenomenon, a work-related problem.
And what are the main signs? How would you know if you're experiencing it?
The key signs are usually threefold. First, feeling completely depleted, like your energy reserves are empty. Second, feeling increasingly distant from your job, maybe cynical or negative about it.
Like you just don't care anymore?
Exactly. And third, a feeling of reduced effectiveness. Feeling like you're not performing well, you're not achieving things, even if you're trying hard.
Do we know how many people actually feel this way in corporate jobs? Is it common?
The statistics are quite sobering, actually. Research, like from Gallup, suggests that a very large percentage, maybe around 3/4 of employees, feel burnout at least sometimes.
75%. Wow.
And even more concerning, around 28%, that's more than 1 in 4, report feeling burned out very often or always.
That's a huge number. What are the consequences? For the companies and for the individuals?
For companies, it's a big problem. Burned out employees are less productive, naturally. They might take more sick days. They're also more likely to leave their jobs.
Which costs the company money, right? Hiring, training.
Exactly. It's expensive. And for the individuals, the employees themselves, this constant stress can escalate into serious mental health issues like chronic anxiety or depression.
And what makes it worse?
Things like unclear goals at work can really amplify it. Or that feeling we touched on, feeling like you have to be available for work 24/7.
Right, that always on feeling. We should definitely talk more about that. So, are there different components to burnout? You mentioned 3 signs.
Yes, Christina Maslach, a key researcher in this area back in the 80s, defined those 3 core dimensions: exhaustion, cynicism or detachment, and that sense of inefficacy or lack of accomplishment.
Exhaustion, cynicism, inefficacy. Got it.
Yeah.
Is it easy for people to talk about this at work if they're feeling this way?
That's often a major hurdle. There's frequently a culture of silence around burnout.
Why is that?
Many people worry it'll be seen as a weakness. They fear that admitting they're struggling could damage their career prospects, maybe make their boss or colleagues think less of them.
So they suffer in silence?
Often, yes. Employees might wait until things get really bad before they seek help or even admit there's a problem. By then, it might have already developed into severe anxiety, depression, or other issues.
That silence must make everything so much harder.
Okay, so we've covered the history, the feeling of burnout. Let's pivot now to how technology changed things. You mentioned that always-on culture. It feels like the boundaries between work time and personal time have just dissolved.
They really have for many people. Traditionally, many jobs had pretty clear boundaries. The classic 9 to 5 workday.
Right, you clock in, you clock out.
Exactly. You went home and work was, for the most part, done for the day. But then technology shifted everything.
We're talking email, smartphones.
Precisely. Starting maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s, these tools made it possible to send work messages, access documents, do work tasks from anywhere at any time.
And the lines blurred.
Completely blurred. The clear separation between the work sphere and the home sphere just started to erode.
Leading to this always-on culture.
That's the term, yes.
Yeah.
It's this expectation, sometimes explicit, often implicit, that employees should be reachable, available, responsive, well outside of traditional working hours.
And being responsive late at night became a good thing. It often did. Replying quickly to that 10 p.m. email or finishing a task over the weekend, it started being framed as dedication, as commitment. People got praised for it.
That sounds exhausting just thinking about it. What does the research say? Does working after hours actually affect people?
Oh, definitely. Studies, like those from the American Psychological Association, consistently show that people who frequently engage in work during non-work hours report higher levels of stress,
And happiness.
lower life satisfaction generally, compared to those who manage to maintain clearer boundaries.
What about the impact on, life outside work, relationships, family?
Puts a strain on everything. Less time for partners, for children, for friends, less time for hobbies, exercise, or just simple relaxation.
And maybe guilt if you do relax.
Absolutely. That feeling that you should be checking your email or you might miss something important, it creates this undercurrent of guilt or anxiety.
I can imagine this is especially tough for families where maybe both partners work.
Extremely tough. Juggling, demanding jobs, childcare, household tasks. It becomes incredibly challenging without those clear work-life boundaries. And this pressure isn't just at one level. It can be intense in client-facing roles, consulting, anywhere billing by the hour is common, or where immediate responses are expected.
Have companies tried to do anything about this? To push back against the always-on thing?
Some have, yes. There have been experiments, things like suggesting email-free evenings or weekends. Some countries have even legislated.
Really? Like where?
France, for example, introduced a right to disconnect law back in 2017, aiming to protect employees' personal time.
Did it work?
Well, the challenge is always enforcement and changing the underlying culture. It can be hard to make sure these policies are actually followed in practice, especially if the workload itself doesn't decrease.
So that brings up a really core question, doesn't it? Is this constant onness just the new reality of modern work we have to accept? Or is it a problem that companies created and therefore companies have the power and maybe responsibility to fix?
It's a critical debate. And this constant pressure doesn't just affect our minds, it has real physical consequences too.
Physical health. How does corporate stress affect the body?
Well, think about the typical workday for many office workers. Long hours sitting, often quite sedentary, maybe relying on quick, potentially unhealthy food choices due to lack of time.
Yeah, the desk lunch.
Exactly. Over years, this lifestyle lack of movement, poor diet, chronic stress can contribute significantly to health problems. Things like obesity, high blood pressure, cardiovascular issues.
Is there solid evidence linking long work hours to these problems?
Yes, there is. Large studies have shown clear links. For instance, research published in The Lancet found that working 55 hours or more per week significantly increases the risk of stroke and heart disease compared to a standard working week.
55 hours or more. That's a lot, but not uncommon in some fields. That's a serious risk.
It absolutely is. And layer on top of that poor sleep, maybe due to working late, looking at screens, or just work-related worry keeping you awake.
Which makes everything worse.
It compounds the physical health risks. And it weakens the immune system, making people more susceptible to getting sick in general.
How does this tie back into mental health?
The connection is very strong. Organizations like NIOH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, clearly state that job stress is a major risk factor for mental health conditions like depression and anxiety.
So the stress itself causes these issues.
Chronic stress can directly lead to symptoms like insomnia, irritability, difficulty concentrating, what people sometimes call brain fog.
So it's not just about not liking your job. Even if you enjoy the work itself, the sheer volume or pressure can still be harmful.
Precisely. Even people who are passionate about their careers can suffer if the workload is unsustainable or the environment is overly stressful.
What about those company wellness programs? You see companies offering yoga, meditation apps, gym discounts. Do they help?
That's a really interesting point, and there's debate around it. On one hand, these resources can be helpful for individuals managing stress. But critics argue they often place the burden of coping onto the employee, rather than addressing the root causes of this stress within the workplace itself.
Like, here's a yoga class. Now deal with your impossible workload.
Kind of. It can feel like a superficial fix.
Yeah.
Employees might appreciate the gesture, the app, or the class, but they also know it doesn't change the fundamental issues: excessive workload, lack of staff, poor leadership, unrealistic deadlines.
So it highlights attention. It seems clear that the health consequences of corporate life aren't just individual problems, are they? They're often systemic.
That's a crucial takeaway. They are frequently symptoms of how companies are designed and managed.
That makes sense. Let's shift gears slightly and talk about the economy. How have economic pressures, especially things like recessions or changes in the job market, affected corporate life and job security?
Oh, significantly. The economic downturn around 2008, for instance, had a huge impact. Companies faced immense pressure to cut costs.
Which often means cutting jobs.
Exactly. We saw widespread downsizing or reducing staff numbers. Companies also increased outsourcing, hiring external firms to do work previously done in-house. And there was a move towards using more contract or temporary workers instead of permanent employees.
So less stability for workers.
Definitely. Job security became a major concern for many. Around the same time, we saw the rise of the gig economy, people taking on short-term projects or tasks, often found through online platforms.
Which further challenged the idea of a stable, long-term job.
Yes, it created this environment where many workers constantly feared losing their job.
How does that fear impact people day to day?
Well, it often means people feel they have to accept less favorable conditions, maybe lower pay, longer hours, more responsibilities, just to hold on to their position. Recent surveys, like from the ILO, show that a substantial percentage of workers in developed economies worry about job loss.
And that worry changes behavior at work.
It can. People might be less willing to speak up about problems, challenge decisions, or push back on unreasonable demands because they're afraid of being seen as difficult or replaceable.
Yeah.
They might just accept difficult situations silently.
That sounds like a really stressful way to work. Are there other financial pressures?
Absolutely. The high cost of living, particularly housing in major cities where many corporate jobs are located, adds another layer of pressure.
Pushing people to earn more.
Or forcing them to take on extra work, those side gigs or side hustles, just to make ends meet, which of course contributes further to exhaustion.
And inside the company, is there pressure from the top down?
Constantly. Companies face relentless pressure from shareholders and the market to meet financial targets, improve profits, cut costs. This pressure inevitably flows down to managers, who might then be forced to increase workloads on their remaining staff after cuts.
Creating a cycle of pressure.
Exactly. It fosters an environment where job retention can feel paramount, sometimes overshadowing things like creativity, collaboration, or long-term quality, in favor of hitting short-term metrics or achieving quick cost savings.
This feeling of just trying to survive, Does it make people feel less engaged, like they're just a cog in the machine?
It certainly can. It contributes to that feeling we mentioned earlier, presenteeism.
Right, being there physically, but not mentally.
Yes,
Yeah.
showing up, going through the motions, but not feeling truly invested or valued. It reflects that sense some employees have of being interchangeable parts, rather than individuals appreciated for their unique contributions and energy.
Let's bring technology back in, but from a different angle. Not just communication, but monitoring. Has tech led to more surveillance of employees?
Technology has undeniably boosted efficiency. Project management tools, collaboration platforms, data analytics, they've streamlined many processes.
But the flip side,
The flip side is yes, the potential for increased monitoring or surveillance, and a potential erosion of employee privacy and autonomy.
how are companies monitoring employees? What does that look like?
It varies. Some use software to track computer activity, websites visited, keystrokes, time spent on different applications. Some even use AI to analyze activity patterns and flag things deemed unproductive.
Wow.
There's a whole field of people analytics that aims to use worker data to improve performance, but it often raises concerns about privacy and trust.
Is this widespread? Are lots of companies doing this?
Reports suggest it's becoming more common. Deloitte found a significant percentage of companies using monitoring tools, and importantly, many of those companies reported negative reactions from employees.
How did employees react?
Feeling mistrusted, feeling treated like machines rather than humans, feeling that their privacy was being invaded.
What's the company's justification usually?
Companies often cite reasons like security, protecting sensitive data, preventing leaks, or ensuring compliance with regulations. Sometimes productivity monitoring is also mentioned, but from the employee perspective, it often lands as a lack of trust.
So technology enables remote work and easy collaboration, which is great.
Yes, definite positives there. Flexibility, asynchronous communication.
But it also enables constant tracking and task assignment.
Exactly. It makes it technically easy for managers to assign work anytime, anywhere, and to monitor progress almost constantly. Even collaboration tools like Slack or Teams, while useful,
They can be overwhelming.
they can lead to constant interruptions, that feeling you have to be always checking messages, always responding immediately.
You mentioned notification anxiety earlier.
Yes, that constant low-level stress of needing to be instantly responsive. And another subtle impact. When performance is measured primarily by easily quantifiable metrics, emails sent, code written, calls made.
The things AI can easily track.
Right. It can devalue the less tangible but equally important aspects of work. Creative problem solving, mentoring colleagues, building strong client relationships. That kind of work doesn't always fit neatly onto a dashboard.
So efficiency gains might come at the cost of a less human work environment?
That's the tension, yes. It can feel that way.
Yeah.
And this ties into how companies try to build a culture and identity.
Company culture. You mean mission statements, values.
Exactly. Companies put effort into crafting these mission statements, defining core values, setting behavioral norms. They want to create a sense of shared identity and purpose.
Does it work?
Sometimes it does, quite effectively. Think of companies known for great employee benefits or a strong environmental commitment. When the culture feels authentic and aligns with employees' values, it can foster pride and belonging.
But often.
But often, there's a gap, or the stated culture feels forced, or doesn't match the reality of daily work. When an employee's personal values clash with the company's practice norms, it can lead to feelings of disconnect or alienation.
Can you give an example?
Sure, a startup might have a motto like, move fast and break things, which sounds exciting, but might actually encourage burnout and disregard for quality. Or a finance firm might preach, always put the customer first. But the implicit message is that employee personal time is secondary. These clashes create dissonance.
What about social pressures within the workplace?
In many competitive corporate environments, there's strong social pressure. Pressure to work long hours, to constantly network, to always appear busy and productive. That hustle culture again.
And social media plays a role.
It can. Photos of team-building events or happy office moments might mask underlying stress or overwork. Junior employees especially might feel compelled to mimic the behaviors they see, staying late, always being on, just to fit in and be seen as committed.
Is there also a specific way people talk in corporations, a kind of jargon?
Oh, definitely. Corporate speak. Using buzzwords and jargon instead of plain language. Things like synergy, leverage, bandwidth, circle back, blue sky thinking.
Right.
While sometimes it's just shorthand, it can also feel exclusionary or forced. It can make people feel like outsiders if they don't adopt the lingo, or feel inauthentic if they do.
So all these cultural elements, the pressure, the language, it sounds like it could lead to people feeling quite isolated even when surrounded by colleagues.
It really can. The cumulative effect can be alienation, that sense of being disconnected from the company's purported mission, from the work itself, and sometimes even from fellow employees. It leads to disengagement, cynicism, and that feeling that corporate life drains more than it gives back.
That feeling of disconnection must be particularly acute for people who already face barriers in the corporate world. Let's talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI.
Yes, that's a critical dimension. Many companies are now publicly focusing on DEI. The stated goal is to create workplaces where everyone, regardless of background, feels included, respected, and has equal opportunities.
But the reality?
The reality is often mixed. How genuinely committed companies are and how effective their initiatives are varies enormously.
What's the historical context here? Why is DEI needed?
Historically, corporate leadership, especially at the top, was overwhelmingly dominated by white men, often from privileged socioeconomic backgrounds. This created systemic barriers for women, people of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, people with disabilities, and others.
And modern DEI efforts try to dismantle those barriers.
That's the aim. But progress can be slow. And sometimes initiatives are superficial, maybe mandatory training sessions, or hiring a few individuals from underrepresented groups without changing the underlying power structures. This is sometimes called tokenism.
Does diversity actually benefit companies?
Research, like from McKinsey, consistently shows that companies with greater ethnic and gender diversity are more likely to outperform their peers financially. But despite this, leadership ranks remain stubbornly lacking in diversity in many organizations.
So the business case is there, but change is slow.
Very slow in many places. And it's crucial to understand the extra burden this places on employees from marginalized groups.
A double burden, you called it earlier.
Yes. They face the standard pressures and stresses of corporate life that everyone faces. Plus, they often have to navigate additional challenges. These can include subtle forms of bias or discrimination known as microaggressions, stereotype threat, the fear of confirming negative stereotypes about their group, or feeling like they only got the job to tick a diversity box.
Can you give some specific examples?
Sure. Women might face biases related to pregnancy or childcare responsibilities, hindering promotions, the motherhood penalty. People of color might find themselves steered towards specific roles, perhaps on diversity committees, rather than roles with core business influence. LGBTQ+ employees may experience anxiety about potential bias or lack of acceptance if they are open about their identity.
These extra layers of stress and unfairness must intensify that feeling that corporate life is killing me for these individuals.
Absolutely. When you're dealing with burnout and systemic bias or discrimination, the weight is significantly heavier. It makes the challenges of navigating corporate life far more complex and draining.
Given all these pressures, burnout, always on culture, economic insecurity, potential bias, how are people coping? What mechanisms are they using, individually or together?
Well, on an individual level, as we touched on, self-care strategies are common. Things like mindfulness, meditation, yoga, therapy, taking breaks, pursuing hobbies outside of work.
And these can help manage the immediate stress.
They can provide temporary relief and build resilience, yes. But again, the criticism is that this puts the onus on the individual to adapt to a potentially unhealthy system, rather than changing the system itself.
The yoga class versus fixing the workload problem.
Exactly. Offering wellness apps or gym discounts is easier for a company than fundamentally rethinking workload, staffing levels, or management practices.
So what about more collective responses? Are people pushing back together?
Yes, collective action is another significant response. This involves employees organizing together to advocate for change.
You mean forming unions?
Unionization is a key form of collective action. Workers join together to negotiate with management from a position of greater strength. They can bargain for better wages, improved benefits, clearer working hours, job security, and safer conditions. We've seen renewed interest in unionizing in various sectors recently: tech, media, universities, often driven by concerns about precarity, low pay, and excessive workloads.
Is forming a union straightforward?
Not usually. Companies often resist unionization efforts, viewing them as a challenge to managerial control. There can be legal hurdles, and organizing campaigns can be lengthy and difficult. Workers involved in organizing can sometimes face retaliation from employers, especially where legal protections are weak.
So collective action offers a path to systemic change, but it's not without risks for those involved.
Precisely. It holds the promise of addressing root causes, but can also add pressure and potential conflict for the individuals leading the charge.
Looking ahead now, what does the future hold? Are there major trends that might reshape corporate life? We mentioned AI and automation.
Yes, automation and AI are huge factors. They have the potential to take over many routine tasks currently performed by humans in office environments: data entry, basic analysis, report generation.
Leading to job displacement.
That's a major concern. Some reports estimate that a significant portion, maybe up to 30%, of current work activities could be automated in the coming decade. This forces a rethink about skills employees will need to adapt and develop skills that AI can't easily replicate, like complex problem solving, creativity, emotional intelligence, critical thinking.
So, a challenge, but maybe also an opportunity.
It could be. It might free up humans to focus on higher value, more engaging work. But the transition will likely be disruptive.
What about the ways we work? The pandemic forced remote work on many. Is that here to stay?
The pandemic acted as a massive, unplanned experiment in remote and hybrid work. It proved that many jobs can be done effectively outside a traditional office setting.
So companies are embracing flexibility.
Many are, yes. We're seeing ongoing experiments with hybrid models, flexible hours, even things like the 4-day work week. There's a growing focus on outcomes rather than just hours logged at a desk. New office models are emerging too, like the hub and spoke, a central HQ plus smaller, distributed workspaces.
Is there also a shift in expectations around a company's broader role?
Definitely. There's increasing pressure on companies regarding corporate social responsibility, or CSR. Stakeholders, including employees and customers, expect companies to be accountable for their environmental impact, ethical supply chains, and fair labor practices.
Could this lead to companies valuing employee well-being more?
Potentially, yes. If companies see that treating employees well, ensuring fair conditions, and promoting well-being is not just an ethical imperative, but also crucial for long-term sustainability, reputation, and attracting talent, then we might see a genuine shift. Well-being could become integral to business strategy, not just a fringe benefit.
So there are glimmers of hope, possibilities for a different kind of corporate life. But are these changes fundamental and lasting?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Will these trends, flexibility, focus on well-being, technological shifts, lead to a fundamental transformation of corporate life? Or will they end up being superficial adjustments, leaving the core pressures and problems largely intact? The future of work is really uncertain. It holds potential for positive evolution, but also the risk of inertia, of old patterns persisting.
It certainly feels like a pivotal moment. We've covered so much: the historical roots, the psychological toll of burnout, the blurring boundaries, health impacts, economic fears, technology's double-edged sword, cultural pressures, issues of equity, and ways people are coping and looking ahead. Based on everything we've discussed, it leaves us with a really provocative thought, something for you, our listeners, to ponder. Considering this complex history, the pervasive stress, and the potential for transformation on the horizon, is corporate life something we simply have to endure, a difficult reality to navigate? Or is it something that we, collectively and individually, can actively reshape into a healthier, more sustainable, and fundamentally more human experience?
That's a powerful question to reflect on, for sure. What role do we each play in shaping that future?
Indeed. We hope this podcast helped you understand a little more about corporate life and maybe gave you some new English words and ideas along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe so you don't miss our future episodes. And for more learning materials like vocabulary lists and exercises from today's topic, please visit our website. You can find the link in the description of this podcast. Thank you for listening.